Hey everybody, I just wanted to say real quick that I did initially record a video version of this podcast, but about 2/3 of the way through recording, my camera just decided that it would stop recording. It wasn't full, the battery wasn't dead, it just stopped recording, and of course I didn't catch it until after I was starting to edit. So instead of trying to make graphics, because that's a whole day's worth of work, I'm just going to put an on-screen effect on the audio, and I hope that's good enough. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. I promise that on Monday I'll put out an actual video version of the podcast. Again, thanks for bearing with me, and we'll get right into the episode. Welcome into the Scoop and Score podcast. I'm your host, Tanner Croft. I got a jam-packed Week 6 recap for you tonight, as well as my first Week 6 power rankings. And at the end, I'll go ahead and give you my Heisman top 5. I got 6 games to recap real quick, so I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. First game I'd like to talk about would be Alabama, Texas A&M. Alabama 24, Texas A&M 20. Obviously, Bama came into this game number 1 in the country. They put up 399 total yards. I think their offense struggled a little bit, not having Bryce Young. We'll talk about that a little more. Jalen Milroe went 12 and 19, only had 111 yards, 5.8 yards per attempt. Those are pretty pedestrian passing numbers. He did have 3 touchdowns and 1 pick. He also, his strength is running the ball, had 17 carries for 83 yards. Alabama as a team just ran the ball right down A&M's throat. They had 51 rushing attempts for 288 yards, 5.6 per carry. Ball security, especially with Milroe, is a concern if they have to play him moving forward, if Bryce Young can't play against Tennessee. Milroe did have 2 fumbles in this game, and McClellan also had a fumble. Alabama turned the ball over 4 times, and I'm telling you, if they do that again this year with the rest of their schedule, they will get beat. If they do it multiple times, they'll get beat multiple times. The one positive note on Bama is their defense, to me, looked pretty dominant, as it has for most of the years. But one thing I will say as a caveat to that is, to play devil's advocate, is so did App State's defense against Texas A&M's offense. Just to put it into context, App State held A&M to 180 total yards. So I got some thoughts on Texas A&M, and we'll get to those in a little bit when we get to the Texas A&M bit of this. But we'll stay on the positive with Alabama. Or not the positive with Alabama. We'll keep talking about Alabama. To me, Alabama without Bryce Young is nowhere near the number 1 team in the country. I mean, most teams, I will give them the benefit of the doubt that most teams wouldn't be without their starting quarterback. But the good news for Bama is that he is expected to return this weekend against Tennessee. And I'm telling you now, there better not be any rust in that game against Tennessee, because Tennessee is really good, and we'll get to them a little bit later. To me, Bama's still probably the best team. I don't think they're anywhere near unbeatable, though. They're lucky. If I'm being completely honest, Bama is lucky to not have 2 losses at this point in this season. So the next game for Bama is going to be this weekend at Tennessee, Saturday, October the 15th at 3:30 on CBS. And I'll put a preview out for that game on Friday, but I'll just say it now. You're not going to want to miss that game. That that has the makings to be the game of the year, other than maybe the Ohio State-Michigan game at the end of the year. Definitely the game of the year to this point. And now we get to the fun part. Texas A&M. A&M fans, you might want to go ahead and plug your ears for about the next 5 minutes, because this ain't going to be fun. A&M put up 323 total yards. Haynes King, 25 of 46 for 253, 5.5 yards per attempt. 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. A&M only had 25 carries for 70 yards, 2.8 yards per attempt. And when I get into a little bit more detail, I think that absolutely killed them. So the good news for Texas A&M out of this game, they kept the game a lot closer than I expected, and I'm sure all of you, pretty much, I don't know anyone that thought A&M was going to lose this game by only 4, or anybody that thought A&M was going to win this game outside of Texas A&M fans, maybe. And I bet you most of them didn't even think they were going to keep it this close. So A&M did take the number 1 team in the country to the last play of the game. More on that in a second. At Alabama, at their place, and it's the closest anyone's come to beating Bama in Tuscaloosa that I can think of in recent memory. The bad news for Texas A&M, the least of the bad news, is you lost the game you probably should have won. Bama gifted you 4 turnovers, and the offense is just so bad that you couldn't capitalize on that. I can't think of too many teams in the whole country, just not even bad offenses, bad teams, just too many teams in general, where if you hand them 4 extra possessions, they're still only going to put up 20 points. The lack of a run game, in my opinion, absolutely killed A&M in this game. It is hard. Bama probably has the best run defense in the country, or certainly one of them. But when there's no threat of any sort of run game at all, it came back to bite them on the last play. I will grant that it wasn't the best play call, but again, when you can't run the ball at all, and the other team knows you can't run it, everything's going to be double covered when you call a pass play on the 2-yard line. Just to point out how bad Texas A&M's offense, I'm going to play a little game here. Team A and Team B. I'm going to read you the offensive statistics for Team A and Team B. Team A put up 23.4 points per game, 303.9 total yards per game, 4.7 yards per play, and Team B, 19.6 points per game, 299.6 total yards per game, and 5.2 yards per play. Two very, very similar offenses in terms of scoring output, total yardage output, and yards per play. Team A is the 2021 Iowa Hawkeyes, and Team B is this year's 2022 Texas A&M team. You guys are really the Iowa of the SEC. And here's the really bad news for A&M fans. They're stuck with Jimbo Fisher for at least another 2 to 3 years, in my opinion. A $95 million buyout is just way too big of a buyout for any team, including A&M with all of that money. And here's the worst part, is A&M did this to themselves. September the 21st, 2021, Jimbo Fisher signs a fully guaranteed 10-year, $95 million contract extension. What is the dumbest part of that contract to you? Is it the fact that it's fully guaranteed? Is it the fact that you signed him for 10 years? Is it the fact that you're paying him $95 million guaranteed? So that's the buyout. You're paying him $9.5 million a year, which is tied for the 5th highest paid coach per year. Or is it giving him that kind of contract? This is the dumbest part to me. The dumbest part is giving him that kind of contract when the best result he's put on the field in 5 years of being there is 9-4. 9-4 is the best you've done in 5 years, and you're getting paid $9.5 million a year. Just want to put that in a little bit more context. Jimbo was given a given the extension after 4 seasons of being there. He'd been there for 4 seasons, and they gave him an extension. This is his 5th season. Kevin Sumlin's record, you ran him out of town. What was his record after 4 seasons? 36-16. Jimbo's record after 4 seasons before they gave him the extension, 34-14. I mean, I don't get it. Texas A&M, in my opinion, is doomed to being irrelevant as long as Jimbo Fisher is there. To me, those results are just absolutely unacceptable, especially with the amount of talent that they have. Their next game, they have a bye week this week, and then they play at South Carolina on Saturday, October the 22nd at 7:30 p.m. on SEC Network. And, you know, when you look at Texas A&M's schedule at the beginning of the year, you would think this is an easy win. And I'm starting to think that's not such an easy win. South Carolina's starting to play a lot better. And I'm not so sure there is a such thing as an easy win for Texas A&M right now. They might struggle to make a bowl game. I genuinely think Texas A&M is looking at best 7-5, maybe 6-6. All right, let's go ahead and jump into a little bit more positive of a game. UCLA 42, Utah 32. Folks, if you're not watching UCLA, I would recommend starting to watch them. They're for real. UCLA put 502 total yards up on a good Utah defense. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR, 18 of 23, 299 yards, 13 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. He's starting to look like a Heisman candidate, in my opinion. We'll get to that a little bit later when I do my Heisman list. UCLA rushing, Zach Charbonnet had 22 carries for 198 yards, 9 yards per attempt, and 1 touchdown. And folks, I don't get why nobody's talking about UCLA. UCLA is a good team, and I think UCLA is the team to beat in the Pac-12. I honestly don't think it's USC. I think it's UCLA. The two offenses are about on par right now, in my opinion. And if anything, I think UCLA's offense is a little bit better because it's a little bit more balanced. I don't think either team has a great defense, but I certainly think UCLA's is a little better. USC's defense is a pretty glaring weakness, which shouldn't be any surprise to you, given who their coach is, Lincoln Riley. Has Lincoln Riley ever had a top 50 defense in his entire coaching career? That's a good question. I honestly don't know on that one. Somebody let me know down in the comments. Again, DTR is looking like a Heisman candidate through 6 weeks. He has 1,510 yards, 15 touchdowns, only 2 picks, and has an 88.4 QBR. This is just a little something I put down. If you took the logos off the helmets and the color out of the jerseys, UCLA's offense looks strikingly similar to Ohio State's offense to me. Both teams have top 10 in total offense. Both teams are top 10 in scoring offense. Both teams are top 10 in offensive efficiency. And if you just watch the film, they run a very similar style of offense. They operate very similarly. So if you can't tell, if you didn't know, you can tell just by watching the film that Ryan Day and Chip Kelly are pretty good friends. So again, if you haven't watched UCLA yet, I would highly recommend that. UCLA's next game, they have a bye this weekend. Then we're going to find out even more about UCLA. Their next game is at Oregon on October the 15th. Not October the 15th. At Oregon next week. I did not put a date down because I'm an idiot. Utah. Cam Rising went 23 of 32, 287 yards, 9 yards per attempt. He did not throw a touchdown, and he did throw a pick, but he did have 13 carries for 59 yards and 2 touchdowns. Utah rushing, 43 carries for 192 yards, 4.5 yards per rush, 3 touchdowns. I don't think Utah is the Utah team that we saw last year. I don't think they're on that level, but I do think Utah will be fine. They may not make the Pac-12 they may not make the Pac-12 championship game, but I think Kyle Whittingham is one of the better coaches in the country, and he's good for 8 to 10 wins a year at Utah every single year, like clockwork. So there's no reason to hit the panic button for Utah, in my opinion. Their next game is against USC. They got another tough one. Against number 7 UFC. What are we fighting now? Number 7 USC, Saturday, October the 15th, this weekend at 8 p.m. on Fox. Next game I wanted to go ahead and get into was TCU 38, Kansas 31. And I don't know how to feel about this game. Going into it, I thought TCU was one of the top 5 teams in the country. I thought they were way underrated. And I thought Kansas was, obviously Kansas undefeated, and it's the best Kansas team we've seen in a really long time. But I didn't know how good Kansas actually was. I didn't actually think they were top 20. I probably thought they were closer to around 30-ish. So with the result being TCU 38, Kansas 31, like I said, I don't know how to feel about it. Is TCU not as good as I thought? Is Kansas better than I thought? I'm thinking it's probably somewhere in between the two. But let's go ahead and get into the stats for TCU first. TCU, Max Duggan, quarterback, went 23 of 33 for 308 yards, 9.3 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. He also had 9 carries for 55 yards and a touchdown. The running back, Kendre Miller, 18 carries, 88 yards for 4.9 per carry, 1 touchdown. And then their receiver is not the receiver that I highlighted in my preview, but Quentin Johnston, 14 catches for 206 yards, 14.7 yards per reception, 1 touchdown, and also a 53-yard long reception. This weekend against Oklahoma State, I think will tell us a lot about TCU. The defense is the question mark for me. I think TCU might have, I wouldn't say the most explosive offense in the country, but certainly probably top 5. And Oklahoma State will certainly test the defense for us. So I think Oklahoma State's defense is questionable at best as well. So TCU will certainly get their points as well. So the question mark of TCU's defense, I think will get answered this weekend against a really good offense in Oklahoma State. TCU, again, I've talked about it already. Just have it down in my notes. TCU's next game is this weekend. at home against number 8 Oklahoma State, Saturday, October the 15th at 3:30 on ABC. Now let's go ahead and get into Kansas a little bit. And I think Kansas is still for real. Their star quarterback, Jalen Daniels, went 5 of 10 for 89 yards, 8.9 yards per attempt until he left the game with a shoulder injury. I could not find a more recent update on that shoulder injury. To me, just watching it, it looked almost identical to what happened to Bryce Young or Quinn Ewers. So I don't think he'll miss this. Like I said, I don't know how severe it is, just spitballing here. I don't think he'll miss the entire season, but I do think he'll miss probably 2 to 3 weeks. So I'm sure Kansas is going to look forward to getting him back because he's one of the better quarterbacks in the country, and he's certainly the energy of that team. But Jason Bean, backup quarterback for Kansas, played pretty damn well when he came in. 16 of 24 for 262 yards, 10.9 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Kansas rushing was pretty efficient, 38 carries for 189 yards, 5 yards per attempt. And I think Kansas has proven enough to us to say that Kansas is a legit, probably top 15 to 20 caliber team as of October. We're starting to get to the point of the season where, as much as all of us hate it, injuries and depth start to become a major factor, not just a thing. They start to become a major factor. And to me, that's probably the biggest concern for Kansas is their depth. Also, them playing in the Big 12. The Big 12 probably has the most parity of any conference within a conference. So I don't think Kansas will be able to run the table or anything like that, but I don't think they'll be the worst 5-0 team. That's worst team that started 5-0 this year. A lot of 5-0 teams, if you follow his history, they start 5-0 because their schedule's backloaded, and then they ended up falling off a cliff and finishing 6-6. I don't think that's going to be Kansas this year. I think Kansas is probably an 8, maybe even a 9-win team. So my thoughts on Kansas is that Kansas needs to take some of their basketball money. They did just win a national championship. I'm sure that generated some nice revenue for the University of Kansas. Take some of that money and pay Lance Leipold. Kansas will be here to stay if they do that. I think that's a long shot. I think Lance Leipold himself is not looking to stay in Kansas. I'm sure he's looking to go to a bigger job. There's definitely going to be some openings. Auburn, I'm looking at you. But if I was Kansas, I would at least make as big of an offer as I possibly could, and they have the money to. At least if they want to have a serious football program year in and year out, he's the coach. He's the coach to do it at least. Next game for Kansas is at Oklahoma, Saturday, October the 15th at noon on ESPN2. And I probably won't do a preview for that game, so I'll go ahead and give you a little bit of my thoughts on it real quick. Oklahoma, the tire fire that is Oklahoma, opens up as a 7-point favorite. Then the line moved more towards Oklahoma. Oklahoma is now a 7.5-point favorite as of this recording. And Kansas is a plus 240. I believe when I looked at it, Kansas is plus 240 on the money line. So I'm not going to go ahead and call that upset, but if I was a gambler, which I'm not, a plus 240 money line on Kansas is looking pretty juicy after what we just saw from Oklahoma, and we'll get to that game in a second, but we're moving on. Next game, Ohio State 49, Michigan State 20. Other than the score, this is literally a carbon copy of last year's game, where you watched the best passing offense light up the worst passing defense in the country. Best passing offense being Ohio State, worst passing defense being Michigan State. Michigan State isn't dead last in passing defense this year, but I've believed when I looked at it, they were number 114 out of 130 teams. So for all intents and purposes, they might as well be last playing an elite offense like Ohio State's. So just to get into the numbers a little bit, CJ Stroud, 21 of 26 for 361 yards, 13.9 yards per attempt, 6 touchdowns, 1 interception. If I can count, that's 6 touchdowns and 5 incompletions. Just let that sink in. The pick was egregious, I will say that. Ohio State's rushing was 46 carries for 237 yards, 5.2 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown. And Mecca Ibuka had 5 catches for 143 yards, 28.6 yards per reception, 1 touchdown, and a 69-yard long reception. Marvin Harrison had 7 catches for 131 yards, 18.7 yards per reception, 3 touchdowns, and a 32-yard long reception. And if you didn't see the catch he made on the left sideline, left pylon, corner of the end zone, I would highly recommend looking that up. That was one of the most alien catches I've seen this year. Marvin Harrison has probably out of all the great receivers Ohio State has had, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. probably has the highest ceiling out of them all. I don't think he's fully to his potential yet. I don't think he's even close, to be frank with you. But Ohio State's had some great receivers, and I'm telling you, I think Marvin Harrison Jr.'s ceiling is the highest. And I can't wait to see him reach that potential if he does. Let's go ahead and get the bad part out of the way for Ohio State. Again, the pick 6 by Stroud was really ugly. That's really all of the bad. In my opinion, Ohio State's starting, I don't know if I'd call them the best team yet over Bama, but I do think they're the most complete team. I don't see any glaring weaknesses, aka Bama's receivers, on Ohio State's team like I do on Bama's. Albeit Ohio State hasn't played great competition yet, so great competition could bring out one of those weaknesses, but through the first 6 games of the season, nothing stands out to me. The defense looks impressive. I don't think it's the best in the country, but compared to last year, absolutely night and day. The corners are still a little bit of a concern to me, but the safety play is way better. I mean, Jim Knowles is a safety-driven defense, so you would kind of expect that. But if Ohio State's corners end up playing a little bit better, I do think this could be a top 5 defense in the country. They have yet to play even an above. I don't know if they've even played an average quarterback. They certainly haven't played an above average quarterback. That'll certainly tell us a lot about Ohio State's secondary if the safeties are really as good as they've looked. And obviously if the corners can do anything. The one thing I do want to see is nobody's really tried to throw deep on Ohio State or drop back and let that pass rush do its thing. Everybody's been throwing quick hitches, quick outs, quick slants. I don't think anybody's, I don't know if anybody's taken 1 7-step drop and tried to throw deep on Ohio State yet. So when they play a team with a good enough quarterback to try that, I'll be interested to see Ohio State's pass rush, because Ohio State's pass rush looks really, really good so far. They aren't getting the sacks because, like I said, teams are taking 3-step drops and getting the ball out immediately. So another thing to watch for Ohio State is this offense looks absolutely lethal like it did last year, and this is all without Jackson Smith-Njigba. If he comes back, the rest of the country, in my opinion, better watch out. Ohio State without Jackson Smith-Njigba is still the number 1 scoring offense in the country, the number 2 total offense in the country, and the number 14 passing offense in the country. And that's, like I said, without Jackson Smith-Njigba, who in my opinion is probably the best receiver in the country. You can make the argument for Jordan Addison. I mean, I'm biased. I am an Ohio State fan, but to me, it's Jackson Smith-Njigba. The dude is too smooth. Ohio State's next game, they get a bye this weekend. Excuse me. At Penn State, I had one more note on Ohio State. At Penn State on October the 29th will tell us a lot about how good Ohio State is. I don't think Penn State's a great team. I don't think Penn State's a playoff team, but Penn State's probably a 10-win team. And if Ohio State does to them what they've been doing to everybody else they've played, I think Ohio State is certainly at least capable of beating Alabama and winning a national title, or Georgia and winning a national title. Ohio State's next game, they have a bye this weekend, and then they play Iowa on October the 22nd. They just announced that game to be the big noon kickoff game on Fox, so noon on Fox on October the 22nd against Iowa. Michigan State's notes for this game: Peyton Thorne, 11 of 18 for 113 yards, 6.3 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Michigan State, abysmal rushing numbers: 20 carries, 7 yards, 0.4 yards per attempt, and a grand 8-yard long rush. State, in my opinion, Michigan State is going to have a hard time making a bowl game. The pass defense hasn't improved at all. Ohio State embarrassed Michigan State's rushing attack. They don't have a rushing attack. Ohio State held them to 7 yards, but I don't know. I'd have to look up those stats really quick, and I didn't put it in my notes. But I don't know if Michigan State's gone for over 100 yards rushing yet. I definitely don't think they've gone for over 150. They're the number 114 nationally ranked 114 ranked nationally in rushing offense. They average 165 yards per game, so I was wrong. And only 3.9 yards per carry. The positive is I think Mel Tucker is going to get this team back in the right direction. He just needs time. He proved last year, unlike Jimbo Fisher, has never proven it. He proved last year that he's capable of winning. They got to 10 wins last year. I do think the 10-year contract 10-year contract for Mel Tucker was probably a mistake, especially giving him that kind of contract after 1 year. But again, he at least proved it on the field after one season. And if he gets some good recruiting classes in there, I definitely think Michigan State's here to stay, and watch out for them in the future. The last game I wanted to get to was Tennessee 40, LSU 13. And I don't know if you watched any of this game, but this game was over in the first 5 minutes. Hendon Hooker, 17 of 27, 239 yards, 8.9 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns. He also had 10 carries for 56 yards, 5.6 yards per attempt. Tennessee rushing as a whole had 49 carries for 263 yards, 5.4 yards per carry, and 2 touchdowns. And I'm just going to sit here and tell everyone right now that Tennessee is absolutely a serious player in the SEC East. If you didn't think they were at this point, I'm telling you they are. I don't know that I would pick Tennessee to beat Alabama or Georgia, but they're in better shape to pull off one of those upsets than they have been maybe in my lifetime. Certainly that I can remember. I'm 25, by the way. I think Tennessee was pretty decent when I was younger, but certainly since I've been in high school and seriously followed college football, Tennessee has been a dumpster fire at best. So yeah, I think Tennessee is in better shape this year than they have been in a long time, and they're definitely trending in the right direction in the future. Tennessee's here to stay, in my opinion. They're back, as somebody else would say. I don't know if Tennessee's defense is good enough to run the table in the SEC this year. Even if they were to beat Alabama this weekend, Tennessee is a legit top 6 caliber team. I just don't know if they can beat both Bama, beat Georgia, and then probably have to beat Bama again in the SEC championship game, maybe Ole Miss. Would they even have to do that to make the playoff, though? If Tennessee's sitting there with one loss so let's say Tennessee beats Bama and loses to Georgia, or vice versa, and they're sitting there with one loss and they don't make the SEC title game. Do you leave them out of the playoffs? I don't know about that one, and I have this in my notes. Here's an interesting playoff scenario to contemplate real quick. If Tennessee's sitting there with 11-1, with a win over Bama or Georgia, most likely Bama just for the way the standings shake out, and they don't play for an SEC championship, and Texas is sitting there at 11-2 with the Big 12 championship, who do you put in? That's a tough one for me. So, as I've kind of alluded to, Tennessee's next game is going to be at home against Alabama this Saturday, October the 15th at 3:30 p.m. on CBS's game for the week. I will be putting out a preview for that on Friday, so watch for that. And I'm just going to make the announcement that if Tennessee wins, Knoxville might have to call in FEMA for disaster relief, because I don't know how much of that city is going to be left standing if Tennessee wins this game. Some quick notes on LSU for this one. Quarterback Jaden Daniels. I always get him mixed up with Jalen Daniels for Kansas. Jaden Daniels for LSU. 32 for 45. 300 yards, 6.7 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. LSU rushing had 28 carries for a whole 55 yards, 2 yards per carry, 1 touchdown. It just was. I do think LSU is a pretty good team. It just wasn't their day. They started off fumbling the kickoff, set up Tennessee with a short field. Boom! Before you know it, 7-0 Tennessee. Next drive, they go 3-and-out. Tennessee kicks a field goal, 10-0 Tennessee in the first 3 minutes of the game. And you can say what you want, like, oh, it's 3 minutes in the game. That's plenty of time to come back. That's so hard to come back from. Just the momentum of that, what that does to a team. So yeah, in my opinion, this game was over in the first 3 minutes of the game. Like I said, I do think LSU is a solid team. I don't think they're a great team. I don't think they're bad though. I think they're most likely looking at probably 8-4 this year, which is a solid improvement for where they've been over the past couple years. As much as I dislike Brian Kelly, I do think he's a good coach, and he'll have LSU competitive again. I don't think they're going to be competitive in the SEC West as far as being able to win it this year, but I wouldn't shock me if they're right there in the conversation next year, certainly in 2 years. And sorry, I do have one more game I wanted to get to, and this ain't going to be fun for a certain fan base. Texas 49, Oklahoma 0. A Red River shutout. Like I said in my preview for this one, Red River's always been a good game. As far as I can remember, going back 10, 15 years, Red River's always been a close game, almost always, even when as bad as Texas has been in some of those years. They've always kept Red River close, but apparently when Oklahoma's bad, they don't do us the same favor. So to get into the numbers for Texas on this one, Quinn Ewers 21 of 31 for 289 yards, 9.3 yards per attempt, 4 touchdowns and 1 interception. Bijan Robinson had 22 carries for 130 yards, 5.9 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns. Texas team rushing had 50 carries for 296 yards, 5.9 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns. I do have a couple of hot takes on Texas I want to get to real quick. And first one being, and this is probably going to curse them for the rest of the season and probably the next decade, but I think they're back. I think Texas is back. If Quinn Ewers doesn't go down against Bama, I think Texas is undefeated right now. And most likely, they're probably the number 1 team in the country right now. I think Texas is definitely a top 5 team right now, and should absolutely be. If they went out and run the table in the Big 12, Texas should be a player for the playoff, in my opinion. If the goal is really to get the 4 best teams into the playoff, in my opinion, you have to put Texas in that conversation. Sure, they have 2 losses, but how many teams wouldn't lose to Bama? Particularly, how many teams wouldn't lose to Bama when their generationally talented quarterback goes down in that game, and then they keep it within 1 point. And I don't know if anyone remembers that game, but had there not been some, we'll call it questionable officiating in that game, they still probably win it, even without Quinn Ewers. And then also the week after, the next loss is obviously to Texas Tech, which isn't a terrible loss, especially considering you're missing your starting quarterback still. I know we would be making excuses for Bama right now if they lost to Texas A&M without Bryce Young. So why can't we do it for Texas? I do think I've heard the playoff committee say they would take injuries into account. So watch out for that. If Texas is, like I said, if Texas runs the table and they're sitting there with 2 losses at the end of the season, I put them in personally. I think they're the first 2-loss team to make the playoff. Like I said, they're certainly one of the 5 best teams, if we're being objective. I wouldn't want, as an Ohio State fan, I wouldn't want to play Texas right now. Do I think Ohio State could win that game or would win that game? Yeah, probably. It'd be close though. Texas is a good football team, people. Oklahoma, go ahead and get into their notes. Dylan Gabriel is out for this game, so I'm not going to put too much on it, but that offense was abysmal, and the defense is even worse. And what absolutely shocks me about that is it's Brent Venables' defense. And I know he's sitting there with a Lincoln Riley roster, but they're just out of position. There's times there's people, they bust coverages like every other play. Receivers running wide open. They're not sound in the run game. It's just bad. Oklahoma is an absolute tire fire right now. I do have faith in Venables, even though he's never been a head coach, to get that team turned around. All the Oklahoma fans saying that they need to fire Venables after 5 games need to chill out. I think he's a good coach. When you hand a defensive-minded coach a Lincoln Riley defense, there's only so much he can do with that. I do think he's going to turn that roster over once he starts getting his own recruits in there, and Oklahoma's going to have a better defense than they've had in the past 15 years. So I am personally a believer in Brent Venables still to this point. And that's all I have for Oklahoma. There wasn't any numbers to talk about. Their offense was abysmal. So let's go ahead and get into my power rankings for through week 6, power rankings for week 7. I'm just going to go ahead and go through the top 10. I will say this. So the way I developed my power rankings, it does not care about wins and losses. It really doesn't. It cares about results on the field, but it's a Vegas style power rating system where what it's looking for is who would I favor on a neutral field tomorrow. That's how the ranking system works. Who would be favored on a neutral field tomorrow? And I'm going to only go through the first 10 because that's where we get some separation. Teams 11 through like 25 in my modeling system all within 4 or 5 points of each other. And Team A might be, the way my model works is it's not a true power rating system. It's comparative. So it's looking at both teams and how they match up against each other. So the way my modeling system works is Team A might beat Team B, but Team B might beat Team C, but Team C might beat Team A, if you follow me. So the top 10 all check out. They would beat each other and beat everybody below them. But once you get below 10, it gets really hard to rank them, in my opinion. So anyway, there's that disclaimer out of the way. My power rankings through 6 weeks going into week 7. I'll start at the bottom. Number 10, I have Mississippi State, which I know is probably going to shock some people. Mississippi State's a good team. They're a good offense. They play solid defense. I don't think they're on Bama's level on either, but Mississippi State is definitely a good team, and they could. I think they will upset. I don't know if they'll upset Bama, but I think they're probably the best team in the SEC West. I do think they're better than Ole Miss. Number 9, I have TCU. Like I said, I had them at number 5 last week. My model did. They took a little bit of a hit against Kansas. Their defense is a question mark, but that is probably one of the most, if not the most explosive offense in the country. I don't know if I call it the best, but definitely the most explosive. Number 8, I have UCLA. Like I said earlier in the show, UCLA is legit. I know they're a West Coast team and they don't play till late, but if you get a chance to watch UCLA do it, they're a carbon copy of Ohio State's offense with a little less talent, but definitely a good team. Number 7, I have Tennessee, the only team that I could say might be the most explosive offense outside of TCU. The number 2 scoring offense in the country, the number 1 total offense in the country. The defense is going to be the question mark for Tennessee. If the defense can hold up, Tennessee could win out and run the table. I just don't think they're good enough to. I think the defense is probably going to let them down at least once, either against Bama, Georgia, or somewhere else down the line. Number 6, I have Clemson. Clemson's Clemson. They're going to run the table in the ACC because the ACC looks terrible to me this year. I'm not sold on Clemson's offense yet. I do think Clemson's defense is legit. Clemson's offense looks better, but again, that's against ACC competition, and it's the same boat as Ohio State. Ohio State proved it to me last year, and they've proved it to me somewhat this year. I do want to see Clemson's offense play somebody better than Wake. They only put up 30 against NC State, who's a good defense, and 30 points ain't going to be good enough to beat the top 4 or 5 teams. Number 5, I have Texas. I already gave you my thoughts on them. Texas would be undefeated if Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt. They would be undefeated and probably the number 1 team in the country. And I'm not going to hold an injury against them. I think with Quinn Ewers, Texas is absolutely a top 5 team, and I wouldn't want to play them. Number 4, I have Michigan. Not a whole lot to say on that. Michigan's been solid on both sides of the ball all season. I don't think they're a great offense. I don't think they're a great defense. I do think they're a great offense. I do think they're a great defense. I don't think they're elite on either. So I don't think Michigan, there's tiers to this. One tier is the top three, then it's Michigan and Texas to me, and then there's a break below Texas to Clemson, and then down to 10. So the top three, number 3, I have Georgia. Georgia has had the 2 worst games to me. They've showed the most weakness out of the top 3. Their offense isn't as explosive as I'd like it to be. It's a little tight end heavy, but certainly still a good offense. I wouldn't, again, if Georgia beat Ohio State or Bama, neither one would shock me. If Georgia wins the national title this year, I don't think anyone would be shocked. It's just, that's my only knock on them, is they're a little tight end heavy on the offense, and their offense hasn't looked explosive as Ohio State's and Alabama's. And their defense has not looked as dominant as Alabama's to me either. Number 2, I have Alabama. They took a little bit of a hit because of Bryce Young not being out. Their numbers just weren't as good in the Texas A&M game. The 399 yards and allowing the 300 yards of offense to Texas A&M, which is well over Texas A&M season average, is what hurt Bama in my model. I do think, if it's just me being objective, I think Bama is probably still the best. Bama with Bryce Young is probably still the best team in the country. I think before this week, my model had Bama favored by about 1.5 to 3. I can't remember. I think it was closer to 3. I think it was 2.5 to 3, not 1.5. It's 2.5 over Ohio State, and this week it's flipped basically. Ohio State's favored by about 2 over Bama. And that brings me into the number 1 team, which is Ohio State. I gave you my thoughts on them. CJ Stroud is probably going to win the Heisman. We're going to get into the Heisman in just a second. CJ Stroud is certainly the Heisman frontrunner in my opinion at this point. Ohio State's offense is, I don't want to say more explosive or more dominant than last year, but it's real close. It's right on par. And like I said, if Ohio State gets Jackson Smith and Jigba back, they might be better than Bama, just objectively. They're going to be terrifying if they get him back. And there's one thing I want to touch on real quick. Everybody is saying when Jackson Smith and Jigba comes back. I think it's if. Hamstrings are such a screwy and touchy injury to have. Exhibit A, look at Kenny Pickens for Georgia last year. Didn't come back until the national title game. Or did he play in the SEC championship game? Either way, he missed the whole season. And didn't come back until either one of the last 2 games of the year. So I think it's a big question mark on if Jackson Smith and Jigba comes back, and not necessarily when. But I'm hoping, because he's one of the most fun players to watch in college football. And then to close out, I just want to give you a top 5 Heisman lists in no particular order other than maybe number 1. Like I said, I think CJ Stroud right now is the clear-cut front runner in the Heisman. Dude threw more touchdowns than more touchdowns than incompletions last week. Granted, bad pass defense, but that's a hard number to put up. More touchdowns than incompletions. To me, Hendon Hooker's number 2. And I will say this. Hendon Hooker has a path to just jump CJ Stroud and run away with the Heisman. If Tennessee beats Bama, beats Georgia, beats either Ole Miss or Bama again, and wins the SEC championship undefeated, it don't matter what CJ Stroud's numbers are. Hendon Hooker's winning the Heisman. And then numbers 3 through 5 in no particular order. I have Caleb Williams from USC. I've been talking for too long. I'm starting to lose it. Caleb Williams from USC. He's looked solid all season, putting up solid numbers. I do think Stetson Bennett. I still have Stetson Bennett in there, even though I know he's looked less than stellar the past couple weeks. But the reason I have him on my Heisman list is he has the potential, just like Hendon Hooker. If Georgia runs the table and goes undefeated, it's going to be hard not to give Stetson Bennett the trophy, other than if maybe CJ Stroud outplays him. And then 5th, I have Blake Corum, just because I wanted to put a running back on the list, and I think if a running back is going to win it this year, the most likely to do so. I would have guessed coming into the season would have been Travion Henderson from Ohio State or maybe Bijan from Texas, but at this point in the season, it's Blake Corum. I don't know if he's necessarily the best running back in the country, but he's the most set up to win a Heisman. The offense runs through him quite a bit. So thanks for watching Scoop and Score Season 6 recap. Stay tuned for Friday. I should have a couple previews out for this weekend's games. Again, thanks for watching. Go ahead and hit like and subscribe if you liked it. I'll have another one, or have a couple previews out on Friday, and I'll have another podcast out on Monday. Thanks again. Peace.